Welcome to the Divorce Podcast, where we explore all aspects of ending relationships, separation, and parenting apart. If your marriage or partnership has ended, or you have friends and family who are separating, this podcast is for you. I'm Kate Daly, a relationship counsellor, divorce specialist, and co-founder of Amicable, the online legal service for separating couples. In each episode, we look at relationships and separation from different angles, including the emotional, legal, and social. I'm joined by experts and special guests who share their own unique stories, experience, and tips, with the goal of helping people end relationships in a kinder and better way. In this World Entrepreneur Day exclusive insider interview, I'm joined by my Amicable co-founder Pip Wilson and Ruth Hancock, CEO of Octopus Money. We're exploring what happens when entrepreneurship meets emotional change and how building businesses around separation, money, and human kindness can and does transform lives. We start off with learning what sparked an idea to co-found a company focused on changing the way people divorce for Pip, and why Ruth and Octopus Money backed it. We delve into how values like kindness, resilience, and emotional intelligence shape meaningful companies, and we dig into the link between money and separation, the myths that hold people back, and what it really takes to disrupt an industry. We finish with practical and emotional tips for anyone going through a separation, and advice for budding entrepreneurs ready to build something that really matters. If you loved this episode, then please subscribe and rate us on your preferred listening platform. Welcome, Ruth, and welcome, Pip.
Thanks for having us, Kate.
Thanks, Kate.
It's lovely to see you both. Thank you ever so much for joining me. Now, I should say the context for this episode is that it's a bit of a special one, and it marks World Entrepreneurs Day. And we're taking a bit of a behind-the-scenes sneak peek to look at the story of Amicable, the company behind this podcast. So together we're going to explore what happens when entrepreneurship meets emotional change and how building businesses around separation, money, and human kindness can and does transform lives. So Pip, I can't believe that we haven't had you on the podcast before, but let's start with you. So as lots of people listening will know, Amicable came from quite a personal place for me. But what was the spark that led you to co-found the company focused on changing the way people divorce?
Thanks, Kate. From my perspective, I've always been passionate about how technology can make people's lives better, and how it can be something that can help with everything from kind of your day-to-day life admin to going through difficult times. And whilst we were friends when I watched you go through your divorce, and obviously it was horrible to witness as a friend as well. And I think the thing that kind of struck me was that it was so hard emotionally, but then the process was also so hard, and the courts were such a mess, and the lawyers didn't help things, and it all felt really challenging and difficult. And then when you started helping other couples to do it in a kind of better way with working with them together, I was like, this actually is really interesting. But as with most service industries, the only way you can scale it is by adding technology into the mix. And then we looked around and we discussed it many a time and thought, hold on a minute, no one is doing this. This is nuts. How is the divorce industry still operating in the same way pretty much it's done for decades and decades, when so much of the rest of what we do is changed by society? And so it felt like there was really an opportunity. And it was an opportunity that it felt that we would be in a very good place to do together. Industries never get disrupted from people within. And actually, as two effectively outsiders coming in, I thought it would be something that would be really exciting and also really needed.
Yeah, absolutely. I think you're right. It's really hard to spot it when you're inside an industry, isn't it? So it's that external space. And I suppose, Ruth, you've worked in so many different sectors. You're an outsider and an insider all in the same sort of breath, aren't you? And you've worked from spirits to startups to strategy consultancy. What did you find
which really made the difference when you came and looked at something like the money space to really disrupt it and to do things differently?
So I became convinced, I think as you did, that private businesses have an incredible ability to change the world. So I've worked in international development, I worked in the public sector, I worked in the private sector. And I found that from all those experiences, I've gravitated towards businesses that solve big problems. But I think their commercial construct is a really effective way to solve a big societal problem, because having a mission to grow a business that exists much longer than you do is really powerful. So I would say I gravitated to mission-led businesses before I gravitated to the money space per se, but I became very clear that that was the space I wanted to spend my time. Then when I looked around, I thought more about where do I think I have the opportunity to grow a business that can change the world. And I think there's a couple of things that are important if you want to change the world. Is you have to really believe it. So you have to be really focused on the societal problem, and you have to think about it over the very long term. So I joined Octopus because it was the place I could find where both of those things were most true. So Octopus builds businesses over generations, and it really cares about the impact it makes on the world. So I gravitated towards Octopus for that reason. And then I started working within the business. I came across this area of financial advice, having come from retail banking. And I just could not get my head around why only 8% of people in the UK get access to help, when the emotional impact it has on people is the same, probably greater if you're not yet wealthy than if you're already wealthy. So it struck me as just this great injustice that with technology as it is, and with the ability to scale that I'd seen in retail financial services, I just became convinced this problem was solvable. The market just hadn't figured out how to do it yet. So that's when I became fascinated by the money space, because I thought it was a completely solvable problem, and it was totally unfair that you only get access to money help if you're wealthy. I think as you know better than anyone, you also sort of have to carry that mission in you. And because I grew up in a family that didn't have any spare money, money was always a thing in my childhood that created stress, not opportunity. There was never quite enough. It was always, gosh, what if the washing machine breaks? What on earth will we do? So I could really understand at a very personal level how people carry that stress around. And I think when you've felt that and when you've experienced it, it's powerful, because then when you're leading a business, you can speak from personal experience. I want to solve this problem because I know how it feels when you get help, when you don't have to carry that stress around, when you've got someone to listen to you, and then you just want to get that to as many people as you possibly can.
Yeah, I think there's a couple of things in there, isn't there? That authentic self piece, the piece when you are really being passionate because you care so deeply, I think that translates. And I think it translates to all the people that work with you as well, doesn't it? And that's the key. If you're going to build a business that's going to make a change, you've got to, as you said, Pip, you've got to build a scalable business. And I can remember at the beginning, I had a good idea, but lots of people have good ideas. The difference is being able to scale it. And if you find the right home, as we have in Octopus, and you find that you can communicate that passion, you've got a real chance of making a difference. I think that's massive. Pip, you've built successful businesses before Amicable. So what did you learn in building those businesses, and how does that have to change when you're dealing, as we are, with the emotion and the pain points of somebody going through something which is quite so horrible as divorce or separation?
I think that's a really interesting question, because in some ways there's kind of similarities in that, although my first business was B2B, we were working with very big companies. What I think made that business successful was the people and the culture, and having a very strong people and culture who wanted, a team that wanted to work together, that wanted to deliver the best outcome. And that was actually the bit that I loved. And one of the reasons I was keen to do this is that maybe I found it quite difficult in that business. I guess the bit I didn't love quite as much was the fact that ultimately we were making a minute difference to the bottom line of a very large organisation. So it felt a long way from the impact. And the thing that I'm really passionate about in Amicable is the impact, and the impact we can have on individuals going through divorce, but also their family and friends and the wider market. We know that the stats, we know it's 52 billion a year that is the amount the taxpayers spend on divorce. And that was the stat we used kind of from day one to go, this is ridiculous. This is costing everyone in society how badly divorce is done as standard. If we can do something better, we can have real impact, not only on individuals, but on the wider kind of population. And I felt really passionate about that. Now, the advantage kind of, I guess, in terms of growing a business in that space is that we have a team of people who are just as committed to the impact as the company. And that's fantastic. And that makes the kind of, I guess, entrepreneurial journey even more of a pleasure, because you know you're working with a group of like-minded people who want to make a difference, who know that they can how they can make a difference. And if we can help that business to scale as quickly as possible, then that will help more and more people. And that's what we all feel strongly about.
It's interesting, isn't it? Ruth, Pitt was just saying there about, you've got a group of people who want the same thing. You can't assume that. You have to create that culture. So how have you gone about creating that culture within Money?
I think the most important thing is focusing on the change you want to make in the world. And the thing that I've really learned from working with lots of entrepreneurs over my career is that you've got to finally balance setting a vision that is sort of audacious, that feels like it's going to really make an impact, with making sure that people believe you can get there. Because if you set a vision that is, if you're trying to go to the moon and you don't have any money to spend, you're never going to get there. And so people won't follow it. So getting that balance right between kind of audacity and visualizing the change you want to make in the world, but then creating a path to run on that gives people the belief you can get there. To me, that's at the heart of culture. And I'm sure you find the same, but whenever I interview people to join the business, I ask them why they're interested. And they tell you their story. And their story in my business is often about, well, my parents, got some bad financial advice and lost all their money, or I grew up in a household that didn't have much money, or, I got into debt in my early 20s and it took me ages to pay it off. But lots of people have a story that means they want to right the wrong, or they want other people not to have to fall into the trap they did. So it becomes self-selecting, that if you're open enough about this is the problem we're solving and you need to feel passionate about that, then people gravitate towards it when they have personal experience. And then those two things together create more than the sum of their parts, and sort of creates a culture that lives way beyond the confines of the business. It's a movement. We're trying to create this category, and people get braver and braver and braver as a result. But it all comes from belief in a mission, belief in the change you want to make in the world.
And I guess I remember from when we were sort of getting together and doing the deal with Octopus, that was one of the things that I think really drew us. It was a sense that we felt we were the most mission-driven business in the world, and we'd never find anyone who was as mission-driven. And then we speak to you and it feels like we're all on the same page, and that's what's been so wonderful. I don't know whether
Absolutely, completely agree. And the same thing that Ruth said about interviewing people, so many of the people who work for Amicable join us because either their parents have been through a divorce, or they've been through a divorce, or a close friend has, and they get what we're trying to do. And the amount of times we hear people say that and feel really passionate about the cause, and that's great for us. It's also great for our customers.
That's it, isn't it? I think there's nothing more rewarding if you're on the receiving end of the Amicable service than sitting with somebody who really gets this from the inside, and who knows the painful points, and who knows the bits where they have to really dig deep to be able to keep going. I think it definitely sets everything apart. Ruth, we talk about kind of the link between the two businesses. There's a kind of a feeling and a sort of almost a spiritual, if I don't want to go too far, but it feels like, we're both mission-driven businesses, and from that sense, it makes perfect sense. But there's obviously a more obvious link in that money and divorce are like partners in crime, aren't they? Hand in hand. What are some of the money issues that you think lead to serious problems within a relationship?
I think there is a big misconception about money, that people think of money as often a sort of mathematical problem. And they think of it, when you say money, people think spreadsheets. They think, oh, what return am I going to get from my investments? And they find all those questions sort of slightly bamboozling. To me, actually, that's not what makes money difficult. What makes money difficult is it's deeply emotional. Is when I listen to customer calls, the things that come across most strongly is, money makes me feel stupid. Money makes me feel like I'm losing. It feels like a ball and chain around my ankle because I never feel like I've got enough and I don't feel like I've got a plan. Or one I listened to the other day where someone said, I feel like a bad parent because I'm not very good with money. So it runs incredibly deeply, just as divorce does. Divorce is a very emotional moment where all of that bubbles out. And what both of those things need is they need a person. You need to be able to talk to someone to really start at the very highest level of, in money, we'd start with what are your hopes and dreams? What does money need to do for you? And then actually the maths is, 10 conversations down the chain. That's not the difficult bit. The difficult thing is the emotion. So that they have very much in common. I think when you think about divorce and money specifically, there's a couple of things that I know we always end up talking about. One is how do you think about money in two separate worlds over the long term? So I think lots of people think about money in a very short term way of how do I get through to the end of the month? How do I get through this really tough period over the next few months or couple of years? Actually, you need to plan your money over your lifetime, and that's what people find so challenging. So giving yourself time to take a step back, look at two separate plans and say, do these plans make sense for the rest of my life? Is the piece that I think people, when they first start thinking about separation, often miss. Is they think about the short term, well, how do we separate the house? How do we pay for these things? That's not it. Is how does it make sense over the next 20, 30 years? Which brings me to the second point, which is pensions. So, I mean, I can talk about pensions all day, and I'm sure you've talked about it on the podcast before, but people consistently undervalue pensions during a separation because they don't understand them. So they don't understand what the likely income in retirement is going to be, how you split it fairly. And, even in the money world, that's quite a complex problem because it depends how long you're going to live and what the likely changes in the market are going to be before you retire. So it's not a straightforward question to answer. But because it's not a straightforward question to answer, some people say, well, let's just not worry about it. Let's just assume that our pensions are our pensions, without recognizing that pension for many people is the biggest asset they have. It may even be bigger than their home. So if you're not thinking about that, you're missing a huge part of getting to two financial plans that make sense. So getting to grips with pensions, getting help with that, having a conversation, understanding what's likely to happen if you make this decision versus make this decision is so critical. And I think it's the bit that so often gets missed, and people so often underestimate the value of their pension when it comes to retirement.
And I guess, Pip, it's how you then take that money problem when you've got the emotional side of divorce and separation going on. What do you think it is that Amicable brings to kind of make that a fairer process?
Well, it's interesting because it's actually, in some ways, one of the things that Ruth said is very much the way that we approach it as well. Because you mentioned about starting with hopes and dreams. And actually, we do the same when people are separating because, and this is why I think we're very different to the legal model. People always ask the questions on when they first speak to us, what am I entitled to? What money am I going to get? And that's the wrong question. Actually, what you should be asking is, what do I want to achieve? You need to understand what will actually make me as an individual be able to move on with my life. And for most people, that's not a pound amount of money. That is being able to live in the house close to my kids' school, being able to both live within a mile apart so we can co-parent effectively. Or for some people, it's being able to retire at 55 and travel the world because that's always been the thing they wanted to do. And actually, if you start with what's the aspirations, what do our two separate household pots look like, not only are you likely to come out the other side feeling like you can move on with your life better and happier, but you're also less likely to have a massive legal battle of I want 70%, no, I want 60%, and how do we split something that isn't 130%, so we're never going to get both of those. And I find it really interesting because I think when we talk to people, and I still talk directly to people who are interested in our services quite regularly, and they're still being told, same again by lawyers, things like, oh yeah, you should be getting 70%. And that sets it up for failure from day one, because ultimately you are splitting a pot. And as Ruth said, you're turning one pot into two pots. You can't suddenly invent another pot. So you have to actually start from a very different perspective in order to have the best chance of having a successful outcome. And if you do that, you can keep the emotional or you can prevent the emotional journey, which is hard enough anyway, getting worse while you're navigating the process. And our job is to stop the detailed arrangements, the finances, the legal bits, making the already difficult emotional journey worse.
I mean, it's a big ask, isn't it? Because if you take Ruth as a starting point, people talking about money when they're happy and wanting to do some positive planning, and then you overlay the divorce element of it, and it's already complicated. And it seems like there's a big gap in terms of education about money, and even small things like just acknowledging we all have an emotional relationship with money, as you were saying earlier. The fact that most of us aren't really aware of what that relationship is makes then coming into our kind of situation where you've got an adverse kind of situation happening, it makes it even more complicated. So if we rewind it a little bit, what would you like to see in terms of public education, and what are the messages that we need to get out to people? So one, they get a good grounding in it, and then they've got a better base to spring from if their relationship status is change and they need to then plan for that.
Yeah, it's a great question, because lots of people talk about financial education, and I'm as big an advocate for better financial education as the next person, but I think it is a piece of the jigsaw, not the entire solution. Because what we know is when you learn things at school, unless you embed them, unless you actually use that information, it lapses. So we could teach kids about what credit cards is and what compound interest is, and it'd probably be useful. But actually, there are some studies that show the point at which you can start to embed that learning is when you have your first job. It's the moment your first paycheck lands and you start to understand, okay, well, I earned this much, where's half of it gone?
Yeah.
And what do I get left at the bottom, and how on earth do I get that to pay for everything that I need it to pay for? That's the point at which money starts to make sense, because suddenly it's your responsibility and you've got to make short-term decisions, you've got to make long-term decisions. The bit of research that I'm really persuaded by and is really at the core of Octopus Money is a piece of research that the Open University did that looked at the correlation of various factors with wealth creation. And when I talk about wealth creation, what I'm not talking about is creating multimillionaires. I'm talking about people getting the opportunity to accumulate savings such that they can live the life they want to live. And they found that the highest correlated factor was age, which maybe makes sense. The second highest correlated factor above income was having a plan. If you have a plan, you are more likely to be able to accumulate wealth, because there is not some magic solution. It's about figuring out how all of these things fit together. Your pay comes in, there's lots of things you can do with it. You could put it in your pension, you could save it in cash, you could invest it, you could do all sorts of things. But until you sit down and you talk to someone about how does that puzzle fit together, and then create a set of actions for you to say, well, I know if I do these things, I'm going to get to move into a bigger flat and maybe save for a house deposit and maybe afford to help my kids through university, then you're probably not getting towards any of those goals if you don't have the plan to get you there. So that, for me, is the really, really powerful thing, that if people go into a tough situation in their lives, which may be a divorce or separation, it may be something else, with a plan that they know they're following, then actually changing that plan is a much less emotional moment because they feel in control. And that feeling of control is something that we try and give people. It's more about feeling in control and feeling like you know what you're doing than anything else. But the place we've found most effective for providing that is actually to people in the workplace. So very often the way that customers come across us is we launch as a benefit in their workplace and we say, who would like to have a free conversation about their money? And in a typical workplace, about a quarter of people sign up for a first session.
I just thought it would be more than that.
Well, even a quarter compared with most employee benefits is high, but that might be a law firm. It might be an investment bank.
Right.
You still get that many people saying, yeah, I find all this really confusing, but I've been a bit worried about asking anyone because I feel like I should know. And I mean, who's born understanding about compound interest and investing? Of course you're not. So the workplace, I think, is a really, really powerful place to help people feel financially resilient. And then, interestingly, for the employer, what you find is people are less likely to leave purely for salary because they understand how all of their benefits and pension and everything else fit together. They're less likely to take time off because they're less stressed about their money. So all of these benefits for productivity in UK PLC sit alongside that very emotional gift of helping someone feel in control with their own money.
It's so interesting because I guess you must be sitting there thinking of the parallels, because sometimes a divorce or a separation is the first time that one of the couple or both of the couple ever really sit down and think about money, because it's just been an automatic money comes in, money goes out, don't think about it, just keep going. And when you throw it all up in the air, we often find, don't we, that, for the first time, people are having to take charge of their own money. They might be having a pension share and having to invest that pension for the first time. What do you think some of the challenges are when you're coming to this stuff at later life? And do you think, like as Ruth was saying, there's almost a sense of shame amongst people?
Yeah, I think there's a sense of shame. And when we're talking about the emotional journey, often the emotions are so much harder when you feel a lack of control. And if you haven't had that control of your own finances, or even the visibility within the finances within the household, it can be incredibly terrifying to be faced with not only the end of your marriage and partner, but also the fact that you're then going to have to stand on your own 2 feet financially and manage that and do all that. So, I mean, I'm a great believer that the more people are educated in the finances from as early age as possible, then the better. And certainly if they haven't been, then post the divorce, we want to encourage everybody to then make sure that they then look at, because they might be left in a situation where they've got pretty much clarity on them what their financial position is, but how can that be improved? How can that be maximised? They've then got the ability to have a plan and move forwards. But it can be really scary when you're at that point initially going, where do I do? What do I do now? And part of our process is to take people through that journey almost in as gentle a way possible to make sure they've got that visibility. It's not kind of in difficult language and lots of random spreadsheets flying around. It's explained, and it's explained to both people so that they understand it, they know where they stand. And that sometimes, can be the first time that's happened.
I think what's so interesting about listening to you both talk as well is you've both started with this position of it's not about the money. I feel like I'm saying the money and saying, but it's about this idea of having, we call them goals, you call them a plan, but it's having that goal and having that mental picture of where you're going to get to. And I guess if we think about where we started with this, that's kind of the same mental picture that we have as entrepreneurs and business owners for where we are trying to get to. And it's the same thing, isn't it? It's the act of having the plan or the goal that pulls you to the more positive direction. So
okay, I think you've probably said it on the podcast many a time, but we've always said in Amicable that divorce is an emotional journey with legal and financial consequences. And too often it's viewed as a legal journey. Or it's viewed as a financial, what do we do? But actually, if you turn it around and do it the other way, that can make a massive difference as to how people get through it.
I was just going to say, there's also a really interesting phenomenon that is probably relevant actually to divorce and separation, that your happiness with your financial situation is relative, not absolute.
Yeah.
So richness is not a thing. Richness is a way you feel. So there's this paradox that says if you're a rich person living in a country of poor people, you are likely to be happier than those around you. But if you're a rich person living in a country of rich people, or a poor person living in a country of poor people, you are no happier than each other. So it kind of proves that richness, that your happiness is relative to your financial situation. So often that I suspect what people feel when they're going through a separation is not a feeling of, is this enough money? It's, well, I have less than I had before, and therefore I'm unhappy about it. And trying to reframe that to exactly as you said, Pip, do I have enough for my goals? Rather than, well, relatively, how do I feel compared with where I was before is a really different way of thinking about it. But you have to really reframe the way that you think about money. And we as humans are really poor at doing that, is we think about it absolutely relatively. And our happiness is quite correlated with, do we feel richer or poorer than we did before? You've got to find a way of getting past that.
Well, we love a good reframe, don't we, in the business world? I guess that then brings us on to this idea that if we've got people who are changing their relationship status and therefore, as you say, are now comparing where they were to where they are now and feeling that sense of dread and concern, one of our roles then, isn't it, is to pass people from the divorce service into the money advice service so that you can pick those people up, give them a sense of optimism, help them with their plan and get them thinking in wealth creation terms rather than feeling, oh gosh, this is just where I am now and this is what I've got. So how do we do that? What are we doing to make that journey more transparent?
I think it's incredibly important. And what we find most powerful is feeling as if you have a person you trust who can help you figure out what you should do. That is the most powerful thing when it comes to money. And I suspect it's the same with divorce as well. So actually the way I think that you knit those services together is recognizing that both of them are very human services with technology that makes it cheaper, more efficient, more effective to deliver. And actually that's, I think, where I think it was a real meeting of minds when we first met, because we both recognize the power of the human, but we both recognize the power of technology to make that human more powerful than they were before. But I think if you ignore the fact that you need a human to say, what are your hopes and dreams? What do the next 20 years of your life look like? They're perhaps different from what you expected, but you can get excited about them again. That's a conversation. It's not a spreadsheet. It's not ChatGPT yet. It's a conversation. It's someone who you trust helping you think that through. So it's the person to person. It's making sure that we can give people someone they trust to talk to who is a specialist in the challenge at that time, whether it's divorce, whether it's money, and those two things knit together very closely.
Yeah, I think that's right. And I think it's also we have to work with people's emotional journey that they're going through. And at the point they're going through the divorce, it's very hard to focus on anything other than how do I get me and if they've got children, my kids through the next 6 to 12 months. And we kind of want to go, yeah, you can get through that next 6 to 12. We will help you as amicable to get through that next 6 to 12 months. But then we as a wider group can then help you then move on with your life and go on. And that's the point where it's like, okay, now you've come out of that, you've got a bit more clarity. Now let's have the plan. Let's work out where you're going next, how you're going to make the most of the plan. And that's why I think the huge power on us as kind of working together can be.
Yeah. Absolutely. And, from listening to you both again, it strikes me that there's an awful lot of resilience required in all of this, isn't there? Both as business owners and for the people going through this. We're getting people at a time when they're thinking about money and there might be huge money, there might be something triggering the desire to have that conversation. We've obviously got people who are changing their relationship status and going through a separation or divorce. Resilience seems to be one of the things that we have to build, not just in our businesses, but in the people that we are helping. So how do we do that?
Well, from a business perspective, I think one of the key things with any form of entrepreneurial business has to be resilience. Because you never know what's going to be around.
We know that, don't we?
We know that. We've been there. and it's huge. And ultimately, our ability to face challenges, but also see opportunities in challenges and therefore have resilience and determination as a business to succeed is absolutely at the forefront of any successes we might have and really key. But that, I think we can then hopefully take that with the team to be something that then they can transmit to their customers, in that we know you're going through a hard time, but we're here for you, we understand it, we're here to make a difference, and we want to help you go through that, and recognising it's never going to be one journey for everybody. There's so many different variations of what a separation looks like, but we can be very clear how we can help people, what we can do, how we can support them while they're going through a very difficult journey.
I think the interesting reflection I have on resilience, and you certainly see it in entrepreneurial businesses, people conflate resilience with not asking for help. And that's the first mistake, I think. So people assume resilience is some sort of impenetrability, that I'm just going to plow on no matter what. And I think people who are sort of scared of entrepreneurship or find entrepreneurship intimidating think that you have this sort of superpower of, I will keep going. You're a sort of Mr. Incredible type character who just walks through walls. It's not that at all. Resilience is about making dozens of mistakes every day and learning from them and picking yourself back up and recognizing that each mistake is a learning opportunity and that if you keep going. But the thing that I think people who are successful in entrepreneurial businesses and people who are successful actually in making big changes in their lives is they recognize that you will need people to help you through that. So as entrepreneurs, we all ask for help all of the time. You know, I ask for help from everyone I meet. What would you do in this situation? And the same is true of money, where actually being able to sit down with someone and say, well, you're an expert. Tell me what you think I should do. Help me understand why you think that's the right decision. That's not a sign of weakness. That's a sign of strength. And it's a sign of resilience. And I think often when we're going through stressful times, we close down and we think, I've just got to soldier on. And my advice to people is always do the opposite. Actually open up to the extent you can and ask for as much help as possible. And don't think that that makes you weak. That makes you strong, because you're out there seeking help. So there's this huge parallel between the two, I think.
Yeah. And one of the values we have in Amicable is this idea of being pioneering. But I always say to people, when you're looking at being pioneering, the opposite of being pioneering is failing. And unless we fail and fall over, we're not going to be pioneering. Because to pioneer, you've got to be on the absolute edge of your comfort zone, haven't you, and your abilities and everything else. So I think that whole being able to admit your mistakes, not see them as failures, but to see them as you said, opportunities to learn, is super important. And I love, you have this analogy, don't you, of that running downhill. Say something about that, because I really love that. And you have this also, the running downhill, and then tell me about the mess up of the month you had.
Yeah, so I came up with two analogies when we started building the business, which was, I tried to find a way of encapsulating our values in a story, and the best I could come up with was a toddler running downhill. Because a toddler running downhill, you know that feeling where your legs are going a bit fast and you think, I might fall over. But if you ever observe a toddler doing that, they're always laughing. They're having a great time. They'll fall over and they'll bounce back up again and keep on running because it was so much fun. And that to me is how building a business should feel, is you should always feel like you're you're going a bit too quickly and you're slightly out of control. But if you fall over, it's fine because you'll get back up again. And I'm always very open with people when they're thinking of joining the business that that's how it will feel. And that's not for everyone, actually. Some people feeling out of their comfort zone is really uncomfortable and it's not how they want to feel every day. And that is totally fine. But if you're going to build a pioneering business, I think you have to accept that you're going to feel like that a lot of the time. So we came up with that as an analogy. And then to try and embed that feeling of you're going to get things wrong, we do stumble of the week. So I love the word stumble because it's a manifestation of that running downhill and falling over. It's not a catastrophe. A stumble is not a disaster. A stumble is recognizing that you're going to trip occasionally. But if you're able to put your hand up and say, I did this wrong this week, then you become accepting of stumbles and you learn from them and then you share those learnings. And we've had all sorts, from I released this bit of code and then had to roll it back, to my favourite, which is I forgot to pick my kids up from school yesterday. And I mean, we all do these things. But being able to be open about it creates a feeling that failure is okay. Failure is a step on the path to success. And the more you can normalise it, the better.
And what about in the Amicable business then, Pip? You're the CEO, so how do you see the culture evolving, and where does resilience and this idea of being able to be vulnerable and admit your mistakes fit in?
I think what we want to do is to have a culture where people are just not afraid to suggest stuff, to come up with ideas, be willing to try things. I mean, we've talked about the same things around failure and let's try something, and if it doesn't work, then it doesn't work, but that's fine, then we've tried it, we can move on to the next thing. And let's experiment with as many different things quickly that we think can add value. And if they don't work, then well, we'll move on to the next thing. There is so much opportunity, and the way that technology is moving at such an incredible pace, to me, is a huge opportunity. And it's not an opportunity to kind of replace what our people do, which is spend the time with the customers, which is what customers need when they're going through such a difficult emotional journey. But it's an opportunity to be able to offer them more and to offer them things that are potentially cheaper or better value, etc. So right now we're like, what can we change? What can we do? All over the place, because I'm so excited by the opportunities that kind of the way technology has gone is giving us to be able to do that. Now, whether that's completely resilience, it will take the business in a way that could allow us to provide so much more for our customers. And then that gives a level of resilience, because we'll know we'll help many, many more people.
Yeah, exactly. And I think the whole technology piece, it's about creating some space to be human, isn't it? And
exactly.
One of the very biggest functions I think we provide is that bearing witness to and hearing people's stories, because that's a fundamental tenet of being human, isn't it? Telling stories and listening to each other's stories and being able to meet it with some empathy and some skill. And if the technology allows us to have more time to do that, then we have winning businesses on our hands, ladies. I really think
exactly
we do.
what we want to do.
Yeah, exactly. Right, I'm going to make you work really hard now because I want some tips. So I've got 2 sets of tips to ask you about. So first of all, from a kind of a business perspective. So if there are people listening and they're listening to this podcast because it's 3 entrepreneurs talking rather than 3 people talking about money and divorce, let's go with that group first. So if there are people listening from an entrepreneurial perspective, what would your top tip be if someone's listening and they're feeling a bit inspired by setting up a business, Ruth?
I think there are 2 things you need at the core of a successful business. Is you need a mission, and I would articulate that mission as the change you want to make in the world. And you need to recognize that you need to deliver every day. Delivery doesn't mean getting it right every day, but it does mean moving forward every day. And the pace that you will need to work at needs to be high and continuous. And that's how you do extraordinary things, is a mission and then delivering towards it every day. And entrepreneurship, I don't think, is any more scary than that. People dress it up to be something unobtainable for most people. I don't think it is. I think it's what's the change you want to make in the world, and having the resilience and drive and actually belief in that mission to go after it every day.
Brilliant, thank you. Pip, what do you...
Don't be scared of failure, because ultimately, if you don't ever try anything, you never know whether it would have worked or not. And if you tried it, the worst that can happen is it doesn't work. But I've never met a failed entrepreneur who didn't say, I'm so glad I gave that a shot, because I learned more than I would have ever learned doing any other role in any other business by just giving it a go. And even if they then decided either it wasn't for them, or the market wasn't there, or it wasn't growing quick enough, they've still learned skills that are so hugely valuable that you can then apply it to any other job that you go on and do. So from that perspective, it is not really a failure, because learning is one of the most motivating things you can do ever. So therefore, give it a go.
Brilliant. And Pip, if people are listening from a kind of divorce and separation perspective, and you were sort of giving them some advice around divorce and money and how to go about it, what would you say to someone listening to this podcast?
I think my biggest learning, and from talking to not only kind of friends going through it, but also hundreds of customers over the years, is that you have to try and separate, and it's not easy, but you have to try and separate effectively the emotional journey you're going through from some practical decisions that you're going to have to make. And if you're really struggling with the emotional journey, get support for the emotional journey. Get counselling, get help, get whatever you need to get through that emotional journey. Because you have to process those emotions, and to be able to move on with your life, you will have to process those emotions. But the legal and the financial bit need, as much as possible, approaching almost like a business decision, like a very practical series of steps. And you can't so many people have this view, I was treated badly, therefore this would have an impact on the finances, or I think I deserve X, Y, and Z, and it doesn't work like that. So you can't approach it like that. And if you do, that's where it's very easy to spend tens of thousands of pounds and end up in court. So you have to try and find a way of separating those two things and using friends, whatever support, etc., on the emotional side, and then other services. And obviously, we believe that amicable is always going to be the best option to go through the practical side.
Brilliant, thank you. And Ruth, what do you think people need to know about money and divorce and separation?
Make a plan. I mean, I know I've talked about planning a lot, but we as humans will always put off till tomorrow things that don't feel urgent today. And writing a long-term financial plan, like, I'm not claiming anyone gets out of bed in the morning wanting to write a long-term financial plan, me included, but the impact it will have on your happiness, your feeling of resilience and your wealth is enormous. And if you have that plan, I think you just feel like you have options. So you're just less scared about what the future might hold, because you know what the financial implications 10, 20 years away are. And if you have that plan in your locker, then whatever life throws at you, whether it's divorce and separation or something else, you will feel way more able to cope with it because you've got a base plan to work from. So the one bit of advice I always leave people with is don't worry about financial products or investment returns. That is all noise. Write a plan about how you're going to deal with your money and get help to do that if you need to. And everything else becomes very straightforward after that.
Brilliant. Well, ladies, life threw you two at me, and I'm very, very grateful. So thank you so much for your time today. It's been an absolutely fabulous chat, listening to you both on entrepreneurship and money and divorce and separation. So thank you. You can find out more about the Divorce Podcast by following us at thedivorcepodcast.com, or you can download us on your favourite listening platforms. And finally, we'd love to know how we can help further. And if you want to share questions on divorce or separation or co-parenting, please get in touch with us at hello@amicable.co.uk. Thank you, ladies, and thank you for listening.